Hello, everyone. There's a couple people that are still trying to get on here. So we'll get started in just a few minutes. I know that this is a topic that we want to make sure we get as much time with as possible. Get them. So my name is Amy McCarthy, and I am the Director of Training here at COVA. And I want to welcome you all to today's session. I wanted to let you know that we are lucky to have Ann Darr with with the Federal Bureau of Investigation as the victim rights or a victim advocate specialist. I am going to then just kind of turn it over to Ann. If you want to talk a little bit about yourself, please do
Sure.
so.
Yep. Thanks, Amy. And thank you for the opportunity today. And just a warm welcome to all the participants today. Again, my name is Ann Darr. I'm a victim specialist with the FBI, and I've been in the Bureau nearly 16 years. My first office was out of Anchorage, Alaska, and then I've been the majority of my career here in the Denver area, but I've covered all areas of Colorado, so I'm very familial I can't even say that word anymore, with the rural areas and whatnot. So, but this topic hits all of the areas. It could be anywhere. I'm going to talk a lot about what this kind of epidemic is what I'm calling it looks like today. So I appreciate your time, and we'll get started since I have some great information to share. So first and foremost, I always have to do our FBI disclosure just for our liability purposes, but basically the views and information that are shared by me is my opinion only and not of the Bureau. So hopefully I don't embarrass myself is what it comes down to. So, but I do always want to also add a disclaimer. So I use this a lot, especially with my human sex trafficking cases that I work, but basically any examples, terminology, pictures, and videos that are offensive is, basically this work is offensive. I mean, we're working crimes against children and particularly violent crimes against children. And so if at any point this is triggering, please debrief with a colleague or a supervisor, or please feel free to reach out to me directly and we can process it together. I do have some case studies at the very end. All the case studies are successfully adjudicated, but are law enforcement sensitive. So just wanted to throw that out there as well. So training goals for today, the big piece and takeaway is who are the victims. This is going to be critical with your kind of information about the trends that we're seeing today. It's opposite of what we have been seeing over the last 10 years. And so this is something I want a big takeaway today of who are the victims currently and what we're seeing with those trends. What does that impact look like? And so I'm really going to hone in a lot on suicidality today and why it's so critical to do a suicide assessment. I'm going to talk a little bit about who the predators are behind that camera, look at some of the statistics, and then, of course, I want you to walk away with some of the resources and examples from the case studies that we have today. And just to kind of back up, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. I talked to Amy prior, and if there's any kind of burning questions where I need to clarify in a certain section, she'll unmute and she'll ask me that question. Feel free to interrupt me. I'm happy to kind of go over or clarify something that may not have been clear. But we'll also have a section at the end where if you want to ask questions, we'll kind of reserve the last 10-15 minutes for questions. So just wanted to throw that out there to folks. So FBI, who are we? So we have a squad called the Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force. I think sometimes there is the myth that the FBI kind of comes in, takes over, and I think there's a lot of confusion on what our boundaries are, what violations that we work, what that looks like. And so basically back in 2012, we created a specialized task force where we have deputized the following agencies as U.S. Marshals on our team. So that way we can really work together with our community agencies like Arapahoe County Sheriff's Office, Colorado State Patrol, Denver Police Department, Adams County, Douglas County. We're hoping to add a couple more agencies starting next week. We are actually adding Homeland Security investigations to our team. And so the goal of that is that, there's so much work to be done when it comes to child exploitation and of course, human trafficking, that having all these agencies together is a force multiplier where we can all work together and utilize our respective resources from all those agencies to try our best to combat these violations. But it definitely takes a team approach whenever we do that. So thinking about our responsibilities and the violations we work, here are all of our priorities that we work on our task force. We have child sex trafficking, of course, that we work. When we look at sexual exploitation of children, that's where it encompasses everything from sextortion, which is the topic and trends that we're going to talk about today. It is what we call CSAM, it's child sex abuse material. We used to call it child pornography, but kind of updating and making sure that we're using language that's consistent and victim-centered and trauma-informed. It's considered CSAM. And so we look at production, distribution, and possession of CSAM whenever we're talking about the sexual exploitation of children. We also work adult sex trafficking, of course, child abductions. I actually came from a quarterly meeting this morning with the child abduction response team out of the North. They had their quarterly training this morning, and they always advocate for victim services and making sure we're there for families whenever we have a child abduction. Any type of missing and endangered kids, a lot of you may be familiar with our endangered runaway bulletin that we put out each month that really hones in on kids who are at risk for exploitation and human trafficking. Any kind of kidnapping, so any kind of Amber Alert that comes through, we're notified and we are assisting. And then any type of labor trafficking. And then, of course, training is a huge component of our team and making sure that we're sharing information and that we're getting some of these trends out there to you all so you know what to look for and how to work these cases. All right. So, of course, when you're thinking about our kiddos today and our juveniles and what it looks like online, of course, I think one of the statistics out there that I've read is about 95% of our teenagers are on social media or online. But when you think about our brain development as a teenager and that adolescent development, their brains aren't fully functioning as of yet until their adulthood. And so whenever they're presenting online, it's, you see a lot of that, irrational thinking where they may have, are asked to send a nude. And so they self-produce and they're very easy in, giving up their true names, home addresses, identifying information, and the like. And so it can very easily escalate into, that moment of what am I going to do now? Because I've sent this and something bad may happen because of that. And so I'm going to say it over and over throughout this presentation that that's where that impulsivity comes from, where they may make a bad decision on wanting to harm themselves because of that choice that they just made. So sextortion, what is it? And so it involves, the actual definition is that it involves coercing a minor by using or threatening to use images or videos previously obtained to demand additional image or videos that are sexual in nature. And so this is, again, something that, has just flooded our tip lines over the past year. I'll talk about that trend and why that is. It's been kind of a steady violation that we've worked with probably since about 2016. but it is absolutely escalated over the last 2 years. And there's a lot of things that maybe have come out of COVID because of that. But we'll talk a lot about what that trend looks like. But sextortion is probably one of the largest epidemics and ever increasing violations that we have in the violent crimes against children across the FBI offices in the United States right now. So I want to play this video for you so you can kind of see what sextortion looks like. And this was produced by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
Hi, Zach. Here's another video from our special guy. I believe we haven't talked all day. I wish you went to my school or work closer so we could finally meet. Take it out. Dinner in an hour. Don't spend too long on the phone. Okay. I know you've been waiting for this for a while. I wanted to give you something special. It's okay. Are you? Why are you doing this?
So let's unpack that for a minute. So as you can see, she thought she was talking to someone who looked like a same age peer, which that's the normal trend where you have, are being contacted via Instagram, via Snapchat, and I'll show you some other platforms here in a minute. But it really is somebody who is on the other side of the computer pretending to be somebody else. And then at the end, you saw all those folders. And I can tell you with all the cases that we're working, that is extremely normal. We've talked to victims who were doing a kind of live share or live screen on their phones, and they actually talked about seeing those folders on their computer. And it's just like playing chess or a card game where you're using all the photos and kind of putting it on those folders. And so all of these images are considered production of child pornography or production of child sexual abuse material. I apologize. And federal time, that could be anywhere from a minimum of 15 years to life of production of CSAM. So huge violation. And especially when you have all those folders, that could be a charge per victim. So, or image. So just as a heads up on that. So here's all of the lovely platforms that you see here, that all of these have been utilized in cases of ours where a victim was contacted and exploited. And so obviously, I think the big pieces right now are Snapchat. Instagram has been such a hot spot for us over the past couple of years with a new trend that I'll talk about here in a minute. But anywhere from the Kick app, I know some of you parents who have kiddos that are playing Roblox, You might be panicking right now, but just know it's because there's a chat feature on there. So when in doubt, always make sure that you're utilizing your best judgment with internet safety and making sure, your kiddos' platforms are private. That's a huge piece. I will tell you, on all the cases that I go out on and I'm talking to these parents, it is kind of shocking that a lot of them do have no idea that what platforms their kiddos are on. Number one, they don't understand that it's open profiles, that they were all public, and just not feeling like they could intervene with privacy of their kiddo. And so the other piece that always gets me is that not having phones in the bedrooms at night. It needs to be, up in the parents' rooms charging, because the majority of the exploitation occurs at nighttime after everybody's sleeping or in bed. And that's where we see a lot of that sextortion happening. So I'm always having to preach internet safety whenever I'm meeting with victim family members. A good portion of my cases lately have been more middle upper class. A lot of my cases are in Highlands Ranch, Cherry Creek, all the like, with kiddos that have all the technology and and the iPhones and the iPads. And so, but it doesn't matter because this could happen to anyone if they're not practicing good internet safety. So just want to kind of throw out what these platforms are, what to look for, what that looks like. All right, lots of them, as you can see. So I would say prior to the last year and a half, here were the statistics kind of that were old that we saw, where we were looking at majority being female. It was very, very rare at that time to have any kind of males. I would say that the average age is about the same as what we're seeing now with the trends, is that it is about 15 years old. That we did see, probably the youngest was, for one of my cases, 8 years old, and as obviously as old as 17. And then the males being 11 to 17, even though I had a 10-year-old boy not too long ago. And so a lot of them are multi-victim cases, where they are being targeted by the same offender. And I'll go over a case study at the very end that will kind of encapsulates that with what we're seeing with all those folders and the same victims. So I'll kind of go over that. So new sextortion trend. Here is what all of you, I really want to make sure that we're on the same page with. So basically, after COVID, there were offenders popping up in Nigeria, the Ivory Coast of Africa, and the Philippines. And so basically their MO was to pose as a female teenager. And the whole premise behind it is that they were targeting our male adolescent boys here in the United States. And so basically how they would operate is that they would reach out, start the conversation, ask for a nude picture, after kind of only messaging back and forth for a few minutes. And then the boys would send a nude picture of themselves. And then in turn, they would extort them for money. So they would say, hey, you need to send $200 via Cash App, or they might start really high and kind of work their way down low. And if they didn't, then they were threatening to send the photos to family members. They would screenshot actually their Instagram followers and say that they had access to sending it to all their Instagram followers. They were actually adding their Instagram followers as friends on there. And so they were also targeting the friends of the friends, kind of reaching out to them. So when we would talk to a lot of these victims and these boys, we would say, hey, has any of your friends been contacted or victimized by that? And so it all depended on their friendship, if they were open with one another, if they talked about it. But it seemed that we kind of had a cluster whenever we would look at kind of like a school where a lot of them were being targeted by a particular person. And so, and all in all, it was very it determined whether or not they would send the Cash App money. I would say the worst I saw was a household in Cherry Creek where they actually sent $9,000 to the subjects. But the majority of the time they would block them and just kind of hope and pray that they wouldn't send their nude photos to any of their friends or family or their school. This very much, when we go out and talk to family members and the kids, it's kind of a fishing expedition. They kind of throw out their fishing line, see if they'll bite. And if they don't produce the Cash App money, then they just kind of move on to the next and the next. So I think a lot of questions that we have from family members is, did they go ahead and send their images out or distribute them? And in almost all of them, they did not, because they don't have time for that. They don't have time to continue to blackmail them. The only time that did happen was when they did receive money, and when they kept asking for more and they were sending more, and then they finally had enough, then they were starting to blackmail them and send their photos out to other people. So when in doubt, go ahead and block. Don't send any Cash App money. But those are some of the questions that we do ask whenever we go out and do what we call a minimal facts interview, is asking them, hey, tell us what your username is. What platform were you on? Did they send you any photos? Do you have their username? What platform? Did they give you a phone number? Did they have you move to a different platform? That's a lot of the MO too. They will either start on Instagram and then they'll move over to Snapchat, and they'll start utilizing multiple platforms so that they can have additional control over their social media. And so if they have a Cash App, then if we can get their Cash App name, we ask that they don't delete any of this information, because any screenshots or information that we have, we can utilize to subpoena those platforms and the Cash Apps to get any kind of server returns to be able to identify who these people are. And again, 9 times out of 10, it is groups coming from Nigeria, the Ivory Coast. And so I think that a lot of times there is that kind of sense of hopelessness, that how are we going to hold those people accountable? What does that look like for prosecution? Are we ever going to be able to stop that? And so what happened in the Bureau over the summer is that our headquarters, they actually have a unit that oversees all of the exploitation task forces in the country. And they got together and are working with our offices overseas out of Nigeria and Ivory Coast and those areas, and decided that enough is enough, that they need to go over and kind of like a SEAL team and try to stop and try to identify these bad actors. Because in turn, what has happened over the last couple of years has been incredibly, just like I mentioned before, an epidemic, to the point where so many of our minor boys have committed suicide. And so what they've done is they've identified all the offices that had suicides, and are going to try to bring those particular individuals who were responsible for that back to the United States for prosecution. But otherwise, the Nigerian authorities are going to prosecute all those individuals there who have done this to our American boys. And so just wanted to kind of give you an update on that, because it has just gotten out of hand with them having this as a means of obtaining cash and their cash flow by trying to get these boys to send them nudes and whatnot. And so, unfortunately, we've had one here in Colorado. The good news is that he actually survived his attempted suicide. And so thinking about when you're out meeting with the families or working with these victims, there's a lot of different questions to really consider. And what we like to do is meet one-on-one with that minor victim, because there's a lot of factors to think about. Was it a female that they were talking to, or was it a male peer? Have they come out to their family? Do they identify as LGBTQ? Is their family supportive of their choice? What does that look like as far as, resources? A lot of times I, really do a good check-in with them as far as their mental health. And, when they were approached about, hey, if you don't send this money, what was that moment look like for them? And a lot of them did consider suicide. A lot of them had already been suffering from some type of depression, from anxiety, from some sort of diagnosis. Some of them had already been in therapy or had some kind of trauma in their past. And so it really triggered that. And so it's really important that, especially for the victim service providers on here, is partnering with your investigator or your SRO or, who that may be, to go out with them to really kind of be side by side and doing your needs assessment and really think about their mental health and what resources you can have. Because I can tell you that a lot of the boys and the families moving forward have asked for our resources in regards to utilizing crime victim compensation for counseling, because this event has kind of a ripple effect with relationships and trusting people, and whether or not they communicated with their family about what happened. And that's the other piece, is we're doing a lot of cold knocking on the doors to say, hey, we believe that your child may be a victim of child exploitation. And so it's, why didn't you tell me? You should have told me. I'm going to ground you now from your cell phones or your devices. There's a lot of punishment that's involved. And so it's really trying to articulate to them that, hey, this isn't their fault. Here's how we can practice better internet safety guidelines. They may have been embarrassed. They may be shameful. And how can we navigate all of those different factors when we're meeting with the families and meeting one-on-one with that youth to best support them while trying to gain that information for the investigation so we can hold somebody accountable on their other end. So again, this is the large trend that we're seeing across the board. And so the other piece that has been pretty significant over the past year is that the increase of tips to the FBI tip line. And I think a lot of that has to do with us trying to get that messaging out. They did a large messaging last Christmas. I believe it was even on the Today Show or NBC, where they did kind of a PSA to all parents that, hey, your loved ones are, maybe on Christmas break and off school. And so there's going to be more time on devices. And so here are some things to really watch out for or look out for because of that extra time where they're going to be in the rooms or on devices. So parents, beware. And we then got a surge of self-reporting. And with that self-reporting, it was actually the teenager kiddo, like maybe a 13-year-old or a 15-year-old, who self-reported to the FBI. And so for everyone's awareness, we cannot reach out to a minor victim. We have to reach out to a guardian. And again, reaching out to that guardian may be traumatizing for that victim because they didn't want them to know, or they did not communicate, or they feel like they're going to be in trouble or they're going to get some kind of punishment. And so it's kind of like this weird, kind of balancing act that we have to navigate. And it's really important that we try to identify, because if you have a 15-year-old who's saying, here's my email address, or here's just my cell phone number, and there's no open source information to try to obtain it, then that's where it makes it difficult for us to try to identify who that kiddo is, because we cannot contact them directly. So we've been able to use methods of trying to figure out their name, their date of birth, and we've been fortunate to work with all the school districts and our points of contact there, including the SROs, to obtain face sheets of these students to then be able to get the parent guardian information, and then making contact with them, and then going out meeting with them in person and kind of having these family briefings, and then meeting one-on-one with the kiddo to do a minimal facts interview. So that's kind of how we're able to identify and then be able to have those meetings and work with them to then share those resources afterwards. So again, here's the new trend. Just wanted to make sure that I got that out there to share with you all. I kind of went over this already, but this is kind of our current response with making that contact. At the very end, I kind of talked a little bit about intel distribution, and we're always finding different platforms, different methodologies by these predators. And a lot of it's based on our victim interviews. They may say that they were on some new application that all of us as adults, hey, I mean, I think probably most of us have Facebook, and that's for old people. But a lot of these kiddos are constantly on different like TikToks and different spider webs of these different apps that kind of go on. And so we're always learning and always trying to figure out the new apps and systems, and who's behind them. Is it a Canadian based platform? Is it a different country that has this kind of platform that produced it? And whether or not they're law enforcement friendly and can share the information of what we can do to further our investigation. So why did this happen? And basically this is just kind of a never ending supply. These people are banking on the fact that it's low risk. They're behind a computer. They feel like since they're overseas that there's no way that anyone would ever come after them, which, and the whole Taken, Liam Neeson thing, like we will find you. But basically it's monetary for them. That's what they gain from all of this. I mean, just since 2019, it was $107 million that was lost from victims, to these predators. So they see such an amazing amount of monetary. I'll be really curious when we get some updated statistics, what the last just 2 years have looked like, when I have a family that gave $9,000 just at one, shot at this. I just can't imagine how much money has been made over the last 2 years because of this trend and what that looked like. But the impact specifically, I've alluded to this before with kind of talking about those new trends, but thinking about that sense of withdrawal. So when I'm going out and I'm meeting with a family, and let's say that the victimization happened 3 months ago, because in child exploitation world, we're always catching up. We may not know about a victim unless we do a search warrant on a bad guy's devices, or we get a tip that may be old, or we're still trying to sift through tips and trying to prioritize them. So it may be something that has come up, or the other tip that we typically get is actually from Instagram or from Snapchat saying, hey, this person may have been a victim of sextortion. So even the victim and the family members don't know. And so it's a cold call to both of those parties. And that's where it can get really uncomfortable with trying to say, hey, we know that your child is a victim of exploitation because of this information that we received. And so, hey, tell me about, do you remember back in March, was your son or daughter withdrawing? Did their grades drop? Were they isolating themselves? Did you notice an increase in anxiety? Have you seen them get placed on an M1 hold because of their anxiety? And you'll be shocked to hear that some of them actually did, and they were placed on an M1 hold, or they were taken to children's or university or, DG for an assessment because they were feeling suicidal. Parents did not know still that it was because of a sextortion threat. They thought it may have been just something at school or bullying, or, something happened with a relationship with their kiddo, not knowing that some of the underlying issues that were really going on. I'm going to talk a lot more about the suicide here in a minute. But some of them think that it might be considered sexting. And so with that, they've been threatened at school by, maybe even the SRO saying like, hey, don't share nudes. That's considered production. And you could get charged with sexting and go into a diversion program. So they feel like, they may get in trouble, that they might be labeled as a sex offender because of that. And so those are just some of the things and impacts that we see with some of our victims in that. And so here's just a couple, based on our cyber tip line, what does that look like? And again, a lot of this I feel could be increased numbers, and we'll get more of that as we start gathering some of these statistics. But we see a lot of that engaging in self-harm or being a suicidal or having that attempt suicide. The predators specifically, they spend as much as 6 hours a day or more searching for these victims. And, with that, you saw on that video where they have the folders. And so they do take that meticulous notes on who the victims are, keeping track of what they say. The trends right now, though, that's more for our female victims, but for the males, again, it's just like that fishing expedition. They try to send out the fish, see if anybody will bite, and then they move on if they don't get what they want. So a study in 2017 averaged the amount of time to groom and found that within 3 minutes, they were able to introduce them to sexual topics. And then within 8 minutes, they were convinced to either give them child exploitation material or even convince them to meet up. And so that's another thing that we do whenever we do go out and talk to these victims, is ask them like, hey, how long did it take before, they asked for a picture, or what did that look like? And all of them, without a doubt, said they'll give us a ballpark of, within the hour, I sent that image. But we can assess that within minutes, they were able to produce that and give that image up. And so some of the tactics that we see is that, the ones that are more long-term, that are focusing a lot on our female victims, is that they use a lot of flattery, a lot of praise. They develop that bond. They really hone in on some of their social media platforms to see, is it somebody who is having, body image issues, that has low self-esteem, that has low sense of self-worth. And so they really hone on those that, really take the bait in giving them a lot of that kind of grooming techniques of promising them a relationship, sending them gifts in the mail. We've seen that before, where we'll send them gift cards in the mail and trying to buy them that way. And then a lot of times what we see too is that they may end up stealing their accounts and utilizing it as their own, and then targeting other minors who are in their same age range, and then trying to get them to give them money or information or things like that. So that's something that we kind of see with that trend as well. Excuse me. So here's when it came to a lot of the previous trends before our new trend right now, is that, they really did send the images to family and friends, especially when they targeted our female victims. And so this is where we saw also a lot of increase in that self-harm and attempted suicides with our female victims, because they actually did follow through with our threats and send their images out to school, all their friends, family, you name it. And so it's a lot of damage control whenever we had to go in and provide that crisis intervention and resources for the families. A lot of the challenges, of course, is that it's rarely reported. So we actually went out on a case. I have a case example called Brothers in here, where we made contact with a 15-year-old, again, a cold knock and talk, where we encountered the parents, indicated that their child may be a victim of online exploitation, internet activity. We asked to kind of have a family sit down. We were able to interview the 15-year-old, And the parents were like, well, we thought you were here for our 13-year-old because he was a victim of this. And so we thought you were here for him. So the same family had both victims, different subjects, but it just is so prolific how much this is happening, where a family unit was victimized by all their kids. And so I always say it's never too late to report. We have cases that may be as old as a year ago, months ago, where we're constantly trying to catch up because it's so underreported, that we are just trying to play catch up with going out, gathering the information, doing what we can to get a hold of this situation. And again, as I mentioned before, it all comes down to them not reporting because of that shame, that embarrassment. If they're going to get punished, what does that look like? I kind of alluded to the charging statutes. And so again, what we would do is we would charge them with production of that child sexual abuse material, which again, is really harsh for the federal side. And then of course, possessing it, because like the guy had in the video, they have a bunch of folders. And so we could charge them, per image when it comes to the federal statutes. And then the distribution would be if they did send their pictures out to family, friends, whatever that may look like, and distribute those images. And so other charges that we could do is if they actually tried to travel to see the child, or if they tried to entice them to travel to them. And so we have those certain kind of federal statutes as well that we can lean on whenever we're charging these individuals. So with that, I know that I'm kind of getting close to time, but I wanted to go over a couple case studies. So this is the Lucas Michael Chancellor case. This was actually based out of Orlando, Florida, our FBI office out of there. All of the red dots represent all of the victims in these cases. And so it really gives a great snapshot of whenever we do open up an investigation in an office, all the victims are not going to just be in Denver. It's going to be kind of wildfire spread throughout the rest of the United States, or as you can see in Canada. And so it's a matter of contacting those respective FBI offices, getting in touch with that child exploitation agent and their victim specialist and their forensic interviewer, and making sure that we're doing a victim-centered trauma-informed approach with the families and the victims to be able to obtain all the information. But in this particular instance, there were a lot of victims located all over. And you can see in Colorado, we actually had a few from that stemmed from that case. And so ultimately, what he did was it was specific to female minors that he was targeting and threatening to send the images to their friends and family in school. And so I want to say that the female victims ranged in age from 13 to 16. And with all of the victims that we encountered from that map, he was sentenced to 105 years in prison, fed time, which is significant because for federal time, you serve at least 85% to 100% of your time. And especially with a sex-based offense, it's usually 100% of your time. So he will be in prison for the rest of his life. But on this particular one too, we had to do a press release of kind of a seeking victims page, where we have to do that on certain cases where we're looking for victims. We know that there's going to be more out there. And so we actually had to put up a website on our FBI.gov website that we're actually seeking out more victims, because we knew that he had targeted so many across the United States. And with that, we were able to find more, which then upped the charges for him, ultimately, like I said, resulting in this life sentence, which was great. The other one that was pretty high profile back in March of 2014 is that Miss Teen USA was actually targeted. And on this one, they actually just replaced her face onto a nude body She actually did not send any photos out, but it looked real, like it was actually her and her body, that they were able to kind of place her face onto this kind of body. And so she was great in the fact that she has gone out and did a lot of interviews to kind of promote and kind of provide these PSAs to really be careful of your images online. And so luckily that we were able to identify who the person was. Of course, it was a computer science student. And so, but he did have to plead guilty to that extortion because it wasn't specifically her body or her images. So it couldn't be charged as CSAM, which a lot of us were upset about because it did really look like her. So instead they were able to get him on extortion and still had to serve time. But that was another good example of what that looked like. So thinking about mitigating this threat. So obviously when I talk to these parents, I talk about creating that environment where you can have that open communication, where they don't feel like they can get in trouble, making sure that they understand what it looks like for the implications if they have their images out there. I kind of get a little assertive when it comes to, this could affect, your college. It could affect your professional career if you're not careful about what you're putting online. And I'm not just talking about photos of yourself. I'm talking about any kind of, opinions or gifts or comments or whatnot. It's being really looked at, especially in the private sector. They'll Google you, they'll look at your social media profiles, they'll try to obtain any information about you to see if you're going to make them look bad. And so we really have those open discussions when we're talking about internet safety and how we can make sure that they're keeping all their information private. I mean, everybody wants 1 million followers. They want to be that next social media, influencer. And so it's really important that, we do this in a healthy, safe way. And so we have a lot of those open conversations with parents and their kiddos whenever we do meet with them out in the community. When a child does disclose, we make sure that we provide them that support, that we talk about them helping us, that we're working on, making sure that we're holding these people accountable, and really giving them the next steps, obviously giving them VRA. We talk about crime victim compensation. We talk about therapy referrals. We talk about internet safety, and I'll share some of those resources at the end of this presentation, but that's a big piece of making sure that we're providing that environment that's victim-centered and trauma-informed. And so again, we can share the slide deck out to everyone, but, a big piece is making sure that there are 4 things you do if you send a nude. Don't panic, talk to a trusted adult, don't give in, do the smart thing. We actually do get a lot of safe to tell tips as well. If you have like a friend who knows that their best friend, was sextorted, we get a lot of those kind of tips as well. But big pieces, do not delete anything because that's really important and a good piece of evidence for us. And then with that, I will open it up for questions, but these are a couple of the different resources I alluded to. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's website is phenomenal. They have a lot of great fact sheets on what sextortion is, what that looks like. The big one is netsmarts.org, which is a subset of NCMEC. And I talk a lot about this website with parents because there's each section is designated for a particular kind of age range of kids where you can play interactive games on internet safety. It has a list of rules for the household on staying safe online and having the kids sign it and being in that agreement. There's just a lot of that open communication that kind of gives tips and tricks for parents on how to work with their kiddos on having that open communication. And then I really try to enforce that, hey, listen, they should not get punished because of us coming here today, obtaining this information. You all are helping us, or that victim may have actually communicated with their parent and said, this is what happened to me, please help me. And so with that, it's rewarding that behavior and not taking away their devices, but making sure that you have good rules in place for that internet safety. And again, I'm 100%, I really try to be assertive in making sure, do not let these kiddos have their various technology in their bedroom at night. It needs to be with the parents or in some kind of open space that's monitored, because that's where all of the exploitation occurs, is in the middle of the night. So again, with that, I'll open it up to if Amy has questions from the group that have been submitted, or we can stay on, or if anybody wants to have an open discussion. We have a few minutes for that.
That is such great information, Anne. Thank you so much. I think that, you know, any of the questions, we can create a dialogue. I do want to mention that this is, you know, being recorded as well. So if people need to go back. And I also wanted to let them know that the Sextortion certificate of being here today is actually in the chat. So I didn't want people to leave without knowing that information.
Oh, perfect.
Any questions from the group?
I do. Are you there?
Yes.
So what do you tell these victims or these kiddos or their parents when they're worried about the kid getting in trouble for sending the picture in the first place? Because it's a possibility, right? Depending on the jurisdiction and the police department and the detectives and all the things, these kids could get in trouble. Not that I think that that's right, but
Right.
it's got to be a huge deterrent from these kids.
Yeah, that's a
disclosing.
great, yeah, that is such a great question. And again, I kind of alluded to it earlier when we talked a little bit about the sexting and whatnot. And it's kind of that balance of, you know, this did happen. You know, they try to be preventative at, especially a lot of the school districts where the SROs are going in and doing a lot of these internet safety chats, where they say like, hey, you could get charged, you could be put in a diversion program, you might have to take a sexting class. But particularly whenever we do identify this, we don't want to use that as a means of punishment where they would get in trouble. So that's where we as law enforcement need to deconflict with those jurisdictions. A lot of times whenever I am getting those face sheets from those various school districts, I will reach out. I have a good one that I did last week where we had a kiddo that was out of Westminster High School, and the family was not cooperative. One of the things that we do have to kind of have that balance with is a cultural component. And we knew that making that contact would have really damaged that kiddo with the family and the cultural background. And so we contacted the SRO and basically said, hey, here's what we have. We're worried about kiddo. And if there's any way you can connect them with that school counselor, we don't want him to get in trouble, of course, but the damage of contacting the family and getting more information and meeting with kiddo outweighed the fact that we wanted to make sure that they were getting resources. So it's really partnering with these jurisdictions, deconflicting, and making sure that we can have that open space to where we always caveat that with parents. No one's in trouble. No one's getting charged. We actually have had a couple where they show up with their lawyer and we're like, hey, no one's going to get charged. You know, we want to make sure that we do this in a way that can be helpful and that we can have that open discussion. So that's a really good question. And it's a balance for sure.
Just a follow-up question on that. Have you seen local jurisdictions that have charged these? Like, I think it might even be good to know, because obviously, you know, the FBI may not be doing that, and may be more aware of that, but like locally, is that something that they should be concerned about? Because I think they are.
Right.
And also just to flag it from the chat, I think a number of us can't see the certificate in the chat, just
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. So we don't have any kind of federal statutes to ever charge a juvenile. So that's one thing that we, you know, obviously that's a positive for us to be able to say that we don't charge because we can't, because we don't have any statutes to back that up. But As far as locally charging, the only time I've ever seen that is when SROs have gotten in touch or have gotten multiple reports of just kind of that, revenge porn, where you have, you may have had like a boyfriend, girlfriend at school, and then one of them breaks up with the other, and then they use their images to do revenge porn on their ex. And that's where they'll charge for the sexting and have them go through the diversion programs. As far as sextortion goes, I've never seen any jurisdiction charge a youth for that.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
I just wanted to chime in real quick. I did put a link into the chat to access the certificate, and there's also a Word document that Amy just downloaded. So if anybody's having any trouble accessing either one of those, just let us know. Also, Amy, there's a question. I don't know if you saw it, how to get the recording at the end.
I believe we're going to upload this recording to our YouTube channel. It'll probably be in the next week or so. The availability will be there. I also want to launch really quickly before everybody starts to dissipate. I wanted to launch a poll about whether or not this information was conducive to your work and how satisfied you were with it. I've launched it now. Krista, can you see that?
Yes, I can see it.
Are we okay to share this with, let's say, so I'm a victim advocate for VOI. Are we okay to share this recording in one of our volunteer meetings or something? Is it okay to?
Oh,
we share it?
100%. I would definitely recommend that. Yep.
Okay. All right, great.
Yeah, I think it's really good information to get out as quickly as we can to as many people as we can too.
Great. Well, with that, I think if there's no other questions, or if Amy, you don't have anything further, I just want to reemphasize how much I appreciate all of your time today. And feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any additional concerns or would like to touch base on working these cases, or if you've seen them and need to process some of that. Feel free to reach out to me directly. My email and my cell phone are on the slide. But thank you so much again for all of your time today.
Thank you.